Hey everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to our fourth research quiz for the semester. This one is a little bit of a change of pace because it actually doesn't have any neurological data in it at all. So there aren't any kind of neuroscience methods to keep track of, which I feel like some of you are a little bit relieved about that. So this one comes to us from the Journal of Chemical Senses, which makes sense because the final two chapters of this semester about smell and taste are related to our chemical senses. This journal, which is honestly maybe one of my favorites in psychology, is all about smell and taste and the intersection between them. And this article is mostly about smell because we're looking at chemosignals. So you may remember from the chapter that chemosignals is kind of a safe way of talking about what we normally consider pheromones in other species. Now, the reason why we don't call them pheromones in humans is because in other species, there are different glands that are able to detect those pheromones that do not exist in humans. So, if there is any chance where we are able to change behavior just because of some kind of hormone or chemical or whatever it might be that is communicated through our sense of olfaction, then we're going to call it a chemosignal instead of a pheromone. So, I don't know. For most of your purposes, you can probably consider them the same thing. I think that psychologists and researchers just like to call it a chemosignal just to play it safe because we don't have enough evidence for pheromones specifically, but we are leaving the door open for opportunities of scent-based behavioral change, I guess you could say. So this article, You Smell Dangerous, Communicating Fight Responses Through Human Chemosignals of Aggression. Really interesting article. Let's get into it. So what I would recommend before you even watch this video is to just kind of run through this, skim through it, see what you get out of it, and then come back to this video. The reason why is because if you just follow this video and then try to take the quiz, I feel like you might run out of time if you do that. So I would recommend trying it on your own and then using this video to basically kind of like double check your math to make sure that you got everything right. So this study is based into two different parts. It's kind of split into two different things. It was done, as we can see here, in kind of a mix of different areas, most predominantly over here in Germany. You can see that most of the authors are from Germany. But I did notice that Monell Chemical Sense Center in Philadelphia, we got one collaborator from there. The reason why I think that's interesting is because Monell Chemical Sense is kind of like the scent place in the world, like one of the leading institutions for kind of like our sense of smell, and the psychology that goes behind it is done at Monell. Huge deal over there. So let's get into it. So basically these authors are looking for whether or not smells can carry some kind of aggressive signal. The idea being that, like, let's say if you come in contact with two separate people and one of them was just recently aggressive and the other was not, that perhaps we can smell the difference there, that we could smell that one of them was aggressive and the other wasn't. And some of you right now are already thinking like, yeah, I bet that you can, but are you sure that you can smell the aggression and not just the sweat? Right? Because I feel like normally when we think about people being uncomfortable or distressed or aggressive, we think about maybe that they just got done, like, with that fight or flight response where they, had a lot of energy or were working out or whatever, and then now that's kind of dissipated and what's left behind is that kind of funky body odor smell. Maybe that's one of the things that they're going to be controlling for. So what are we? I'm just going to skip right over here to the study because I just told you a little bit about what they are expecting or what they hope to find. The two studies here, the first, I'm going to say, like, this first one right here is about the donation of the chemosignals, and study 2 is about people smelling those chemosignals. So basically study 1 is going to be people kind of delivering and donating their scent. And then study number 2 is going to be a totally different group of people smelling those scents and then rating them across a variety of measures. They got I was going to say 22, but they actually got 16 non-smoker. I'm just looking at some of the language they use here, because I was thinking about, should I unpack this? And I think that I will, because I think it might be interesting to some of you. So they recruited 22 people. They only use 16. They're looking specifically at healthy folks that are male, that are heterosexual, non-smokers. Why are they so specific here? The reason why is because they want non-smokers. Why? Because, well, smoke, especially cigarette smoke, tobacco-based smoke, carries scent in it, and they don't want that scent to confound the experiment. They use heterosexual men, and the reason why they specify heterosexual is because there have been differences shown in the way that people prefer scents in romantic partners, where for example, men, and it's going to sound, I don't know if I even have time to talk about all this stuff, because this is a big concept that usually people have a lot of questions about. But if you take two straight guys, and you have those two straight guys smell each other's body odor, they usually typically will say like, oh, no thank you, that smells unpleasant. If you take a straight guy and a straight woman and have them smell each other's body odor, they will say that is less aversive and may even find it somewhat pleasant to smell the opposite sex's body odor. So the twist here is then if you have two guys that are gay, or two women that are gay, and you have them smell each other's body odor, that they will typically not say that it is aversive, that instead they will almost show basically the same patterns as folks that are straight smelling the opposite sex. So basically, people have looked at, we do seem to kind of carry some kind of signal about sexual preferences in our scent. Males, for the same reason, they're doing that. And healthy, just to make sure that, if somebody's unhealthy, that might contribute to smell differences, and they wanted to rule that out. So that's why they're being so specific about the people that they are recruiting here. So basically, they recruited these people, and then they got them to donate their body odor. And this is wild, y'all. I don't know if you read this already, and if you did, maybe you were like, oh, this is so weird. But here's what they did. They basically got these people to come in and told them, if I remember correctly, that basically we want you to come in and for 2 days not shower with any kind of fragranced body wash and shampoo. What we want to do is to throw you into these t-shirts, and in these t-shirts, in the armpits, they have these cotton swabs. But the idea being that whenever somebody is physically exerting themselves, they're working out or whatever, that scent, that sweat is going to accumulate in the armpits with those cotton swabs, and those cotton swabs is what they are donating there. So basically, they're working out, they're getting all nasty and funky, and they're going to be donating those smells. So that's what the donation procedure is here. But they also then kind of have a couple of different a couple of different conditions that these individuals are going into. So first, they have a baseline. So for this, you see that they have ergometer. The ergometer here, I had to look this up because I wasn't sure what an ergometer was. It is a exercise machine, and it's one of those things where if I have this right, it's like usually you kind of hold on to something sturdy with your arms, and then your legs are kind of kicking something like a bicycle. If you Google it, you'll see it and you'll instantly recognize it. It's that thing that sometimes you see, like, it's just the base that has these pedals on it, and maybe there's like a heavy duty fan in the middle of it, so that whenever you're pushing down on the pedals, it's blowing stuff out. That's an ergometer. So for baseline, they got the people in, they got them a little bit sweaty for 3 minutes, then they used those cotton swabs. For here, what they are going to be doing is they are going to be doing exercise. So they are doing a kind of a mental math calculation. After that, they tell them, hey, your score was average, and then they make them work out on that little bike. So that is the exercise condition. The next condition, and this is the aggression condition, they're going to do the same thing where they are asking them to do mental math, except this time they put a time constraint on it. So they're really trying to push these people to do faster than they did in the previous trials. So they're getting stressed. They're getting a little bit frustrated because they have this timed component now. And then at the end of this, instead of being told, hey, your math was average, then it doesn't matter how well they do. They tell them, sorry, your score was actually below average, and that's kind of pathetic. So there's not only kind of, this letting them know that it's below average, but they also have this social component where they tell them, usually in an insulting way, is my understanding, that they perform below average, and that's bad. Then they got, instead of going to the ergometer, they had a punching bag, and they were allowed to kind of punch and spar on this bag for 3 minutes. And of course, after that, they also got that sweat from those cotton swabs. They basically have these 3 different conditions: baseline, exercise, and aggression. Why do they have exercise and aggression? Basically what they're doing in this case, this is kind of like a control condition where they're trying to do all the same things. You got mental math, you got some kind of social feedback, and you have this exercise component. They're doing the exact same things, but this time with a slightly more aggressive type of way. They then asked people who had finished this to kind of rate their feelings on this stuff, so they're self-rating their feelings. And so I'm just going to draw your attention over to the baseline right here. Here what we see is that the motivation to harm, pretty low for these individuals in this case. When asked about angry feelings, also pretty low. When asked about physical activity, so how exhausted are you, very low. That is all quite different. Sorry, let me erase that now. If we now look at the other conditions where they're asked the exact same things, and really the only thing that's changing, as you can see, between baseline and exercise is this right here. So the physical activity goes up a little bit. But we do see differences across the board for the aggression, where their motivation to harm goes up, their angry feelings goes up, and then also their physical activity goes up as well. So basically asking the people who donated their smells about this is what they found. Now let's look at the exposure to those chemo signals now. So whenever they are, they're going to bring in a mix of men and women this time, all heterosexual, and they're going to, for the same reasons that we talked about, and they are going to now smell these funky samples of sweat from those individuals. So they had them come in, they gave them the Monex, which is a test to make sure that people can smell okay and they don't have anosmia or anything like that. They gave them the state trait anxiety inventory. I don't really think that they kind of go into much detail about that at all. I think they're just kind of like looking to see if stress played a role in this. But let's talk about the exposure condition here, because this is where the kind of fun thing, what they did. They had kind of like a little mask they put underneath the nose of that individual, and then they basically made them smell different conditions, and they were double blind about those conditions. So basically the participant didn't know what they were smelling, and the researcher also was blind to what condition was being administered, just to try to minimize any potential bias that they had. Let's see, between trials they took 15 minutes between those conditions, and the reason for that is for what they call a washout phase. The reason for that is to make sure that over the 15 minutes that any kind of lingering scent from that condition has gone away and is over with. So that's basically what they did. They gave them those smells. Now, while they did that, they also asked them to do, for each of these conditions, 2 separate tasks. And these tasks are, if you've taken cognitive psychology, actually, you may recognize some of these. So they gave them an emotional face recognition task and an emotional Stroop task. So they talk about what the specifics of those tasks are on this page, on page 40. So check that out before you take the quiz to familiarize yourself with those tasks. I'll tell you about what they are real quickly here. Basically, the emotional face recognition task, they look at a face and are asked to try to recognize the emotion on it. So let's see, was that face angry, was it sad, or was it happy, or was it neutral? And they had pictures of male and female faces doing this, usually with no hair, so it's just the face. And they had this in kind of like, quote unquote, like an easy trial, a medium trial, and a hard trial, and those come down from if the face is looking directly at you, if the face is kind of tilted halfway, you know, like, well, not really halfway, 45 degrees away versus all the way 90 degrees away. So it's much harder to detect someone's emotions if they are 90 degrees away from you like that than if they are looking almost at you or if they're looking directly at you. So that's the emotional face recognition task. The next piece is the emotional Stroop task. The emotional Stroop task, if you haven't seen the Stroop task before, basically, actually, hold on, give me 1 second and I can show you. All right, here I got you an example. So in this example right here, it might be a little bit hard to see. I want you to read out, and this is from Wikipedia, so you know it's legit. So just tell me what the color of the word is. Don't read it out loud. Don't tell me what the word says. Just tell me what the ink of the font color is. So we got red, green, purple, brown, blue, and red. But if we look down at this down here, we're going to see that now the word and the font color mismatch, and it makes it a little bit harder to read these out loud. So here I have green, brown, blue, purple, red, and green, and I had to kind of concentrate to get that done. But you can try it out, you know, like here if you want to try to green, yellow, red, brown, green, black, red, blue, green, purple, blue, purple. It's tough. So that's the Stroop effect. And so what people do in the emotional Stroop effect is that instead of just doing the color, they also have a condition where they are going to have emotional based words. Some of those are happy words. Some of them are neutral words, angry words, or fearful words. So you might be trying to read out what the color of the word is, and sometimes those words are happy, sometimes those words are neutral, sometimes those words are angry, and sometimes those words are fearful. And so if you take longer to say the color when it is happy, for example, a happy word, then what we would say in cognitive psychology is that means that you have a bias to kind of linger on happy content, or you have a bias towards happy items. So it takes you a little bit longer than if it's completely neutral, and that can tell us all sorts of things. You know, like if we are looking at trauma, people have done this with trauma, where they look at words that are related to a trauma, and what they find is that people are slow to name the color whenever that word is associated with trauma. So basically, that's what they did here in the emotional Stroop, where they're essentially reading out the ink color of those fonts. All right, so let me cut straight to the chase here. I feel like this group wasn't super excited about their results. So their results is essentially that, on one hand, people weren't really able to say what it was. That whenever they smelled, that smell, and then were asked, is this baseline, exercise, or aggression, that people weren't really able to tell the difference. They weren't able to tell any kind of differences in pleasantness or intensity here, and so that was kind of a big whiff, no pun intended, that participants just weren't able to tell consciously the difference of those conditions. When we look at the other tasks, so the emotional face recognition task and the emotional Stroop task, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. And so what they find is that for emotional faces, nothing. Basically, it didn't matter if you're in the aggression, and they hypothesized that when people were exposed to the aggression chemo signals, that they would respond differently to the faces, that maybe they would recognize the angry faces faster because they had just smelled the angry chemo signal. That is not what they found. So that was a really cool hypothesis. It did not turn out like they thought, which is a little bit disappointing. It would be really cool if it did happen that way. The emotional Stroop task, though, did find something kind of interesting. So we can scroll up here where the second analysis kind of talks about that. And so again, they're giving them this emotional Stroop task whenever they have the no odor, so the baseline phase, the exercise phase, and the aggression phase, and then the different kinds of categories of words. And what they found is that for words that prompted anxiety, that there was a significant difference between when people smelled the aggression versus when they smelled the exercise. So basically, whenever people were exposed to the aggressive pheromones or chemo signals, that it took them longer to report what that color was compared to whenever it was just based on exercise. Now, we're not talking about a huge difference here. We're talking about the difference between essentially 100 milliseconds, which doesn't sound like much, but in cognitive psychology and in neuroscience, when we're talking about how fast the brain moves, 100 milliseconds is actually a pretty big slowdown period. So that is significant. It is interesting. And what the researchers take from this is that this must mean that aggressive chemo signals, whenever we are exposed to them, it actually, that we do detect something about it. We may not actually be able to put it into words. We may not be conscious of what they are, which is what the first results paragraph is talking about. But we do have some kind of change to our cognition about it, that there is something about our mental processes that are impaired whenever we are around someone who has recently been aggressive, based just on their smell. And I think that's pretty much it. The discussion here is okay. I was a little bit disappointed by the discussion, if I'm being honest with you. I just didn't find, and I think it's maybe because the results are interesting, they're thought-provoking, they would provide a lot of discussion, but they're not 100% clear. They're not perfectly obvious, right? Like, it's kind of interesting that we don't have this kind of conscious perception of this aggressive chemo signal, but we have this kind of involuntary, unconscious perception of it that affects our behavior in ways that we're not necessarily aware of. All right, so that is this article. You smell dangerous. So, yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions at all about this article, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk about it with you. Otherwise, I will see you later. Bye-bye.